Hello, folks, and welcome to Appalachian Intelligence. We hope you guys enjoyed the last episode with Tanya. She was a wealth of knowledge. She was a great guest. She owns and operates the old hospital on College Hill. So she was giving us a little bit of the history of that place, talking about some of the stories. I shared a little bit of my accounts, my experience that I had there. And it's a place that me and Ryan and hopefully a few more people are planning to go and investigate later this spring, early summer, somewhere in there, and get what cool video we can get from that and post it on YouTube for you guys to check out. So be looking forward to that. We will definitely be teasing it before it happens. So you guys just keep your eyes out for that one. We are going to read a couple, a thing that we started trying to do is some 5-star reviews that we're getting. We want to read 1 or 2 an episode just to encourage you guys to keep leaving them. And we'll give you a shout out on the show when you do that. So we got one from Nick Pernicano. It says, love it. Love the casual and informative style of the show. Looking forward to more episodes. Nick, thank you for that. I hope I said your name right. I hope I didn't butcher it too bad. If I did, let me know and we'll redo it. I'll fix it for next time. I don't care to be wrong. But thanks a lot for that. And another one's from Christian Hyder. It says, great content. As a native Appalachian transplanted into Florida, I can't wait to tune in to new episodes. Keep it up. Watch out for those mountain lights. They'll get you. And Christian, I'm sure they will get you. We're going to be doing some mountain lights episodes too, like brown mountain lights. Man, I love that whole legend, that lore and everything behind that. It's awesome. So thank you guys. Thank you for the great reviews. Thank you for tuning in. And if you do enjoy what you're hearing, if you're listening right now and you enjoy what you're hearing on a weekly basis, share the show. Just share it any way that you want to share it. Share it with whoever about what that's the best way to make this show grow is sharing it by word of mouth. And we can do all the pushing that we want to do, but we're only a couple hicks here in the Appalachians that we only know so many people. Our circle's only so broad and wide. So if you do like what you hear and share the show, today we have a returning champ. This will be our first returning guest and our new research producer of the Appalachian Intelligence podcast and YouTube channel, Lance Compton. Lance, good to see you again, buddy. How are you?
Doing great, John. Doing great. Glad to be back. I'm glutton for punishment, I guess, so I'm here again.
That's it. I mean, everybody has to have a guilty pleasure, and this just has to be yours, I guess.
It's perfectly. I'm okay with that. I mean, have no problem this being my guilty pleasure.
And I'm no problem being your guilty pleasure.
Hey.
Well, Backstreet Boys is my guilty pleasure.
I wish my wife would say that.
The Backstreet Boys are my guilty pleasure, but y'all can do whatever you want to do.
Sink all the way.
So today we're diving into something that I am extremely interested in. Lance messaged me probably a couple weeks back and asked if I'd ever heard the term granny witches. And I said, well, no, I've never heard that specific term, but my mama is definitely a witch. I mean, whatever it means, she's a witch. So, yeah, I've never heard that specific term, but I already know what you're talking about. So he was like, we'll do a little digging in it, do a little research. We need to do an episode. So here we are, and we're going to do this episode. And in the little bit of looking into that I did, number one, it is my mama. And mama, that's how we say grandma, or that's how I say it. I don't know how you guys say it. But my grandma, my grandmother, that's my mama. And a lot of the stuff that I was reading, with this whole granny witch thing and the Appalachian folk magic thing, it describes her to a T. But here's the thing. There is no way in the world that I would ever walk up to her and call her a granny witch or associate her with this in any kind of way, because even though it's kind of how she operates, she would smack the red off my head if I associate her with the term or the name witch or magic in any kind of way. And I'm sure we're gonna be getting into some of that.
Fighting words for sure. If you were to walk in and say that to her, I'm sure.
Oh yeah, definitely. So Lance, man, we'll jump straight into this. We'll let you get rolling with. You've been teasing me for like a week now, talking about you have this mind blowing stuff, and I've been like a little schoolgirl, just all fidgety, waiting for a test. But this ain't a test. I'm super pumped for what you have to say. So let's dive right into it. And
it's true. He is like a schoolgirl at work.
Giggles and everything.
I'm giggling now.
All right. Granny witches. Well, that's a fairly new term for me as well. One of the guys that I work with, who is now a fan also of the podcast,
Nice.
Per some of the things we've talked about, asked me, I don't know, a month or so ago, when we were having a couple other conversations about a few things. And he's like, you ever heard of, and he called it granny witches. And I kind of looked at him for a second. I was like, I don't know what that is. So I hopped over to my computer and searched in grainy witches, grainy, Grayiny, like something that was grainy, couldn't see very well, because that's kind of what I thought that he was talking about. And I kept getting all these links to the Blair Witch Project and all this stuff. I was like, I know what the Blair Witch Project is, and kind of have a little bit of idea of what that, all that is, and even the Bell Witch, and kind of knows from Tennessee, and understand what that is. I didn't think that's what he was talking about, so I'll hop back over and ask him again. I was like, why don't you spell that for me? And he spelled it Granny. Oh, granny. But with his accent, he was saying grainy, and it's just how he was. Then I made the connection. Oh, he's saying granny. So I got to looking, and then was curious about it, and then started to dig into it. And then I got to thinking, I know a lot of people that have grandmas or mamaws or mamas or mimis or whatever it is that we call them, that do a lot of these things just every day. And great grandmas that kind of follow some of these things that what we probably more commonly know as faith healing, Appalachian folklore, interesting things that we've always heard and kind of just do, but don't really know where they come from. Knocking on wood would be an example of that. We all have done that before. My wife does it now. Anytime we say something, hopefully comes true or whatever, knock on wood, doesn't come true. Throwing salt over the shoulder, throwing out cornmeal out the back door when before you serve cornbread, all these kind of things that I knew and that are part of our culture, and have heard about and read about and knew that people have done and watched people do these things, but didn't really understand why they happened. Well, granny witches, in more of an endearing term than a non-endearing term, is kind of a way in which people are referring to faith healing, Appalachian folklore, folk magic, folk conjuring type things, and not in a negative connotation as it can be at times. It's kind of what granny witching is. Now, there is a lady that just a couple of months ago was actually in Asheville, North Carolina, at a granny witch weekend retreat. In which they were kind of talking about some of the history and stuff, but they had essentially also blending some of the new age occult, I guess, witchery into the granny witching, and kind of merging these two things together, but still based in the same thing. And I haven't had a chance to talk to her yet. We're setting up an interview with her, so I can kind of talk to her and see exactly what was going on, have an idea. We just haven't had the schedule time to meet yet, but so it's still a thing, and it's still very much catching some notoriety, I guess, is even now, probably more so even now. So that's what granny, when we refer to for the next however long we're here, granny witch, that's what we're talking about. Okay. Now, granny magic, Appalachian granny magic, and if you were to YouTube like Appalachian granny magic or granny folklore in any way, you will find people talking about these videos and all kinds of all those sorts of things. And some more examples. I want to ask you to. You probably actually my family. Now, my dad was born in Appalachia, grew up here. Iowa did the same. My mother is from Ohio. Her parents are from Ohio. My dad's parents are all from Pennsylvania, or both from Pennsylvania and Ohio. So while I grew up in Appalachia and consider myself Appalachian, we are not an old Appalachian family, if that makes sense. We were kind of transplanted into that. Now we've been here, I've been here my whole life, and all these different things. But as far as my mamaw having stuff passed down to her from her mamaw from the Appalachia, I don't really have that. So I'm going to ask you two, you guys got any examples of this kind of stuff that your grandmas or mamaws would say that would kind of fall into this?
It's like I talked to Justin. I can't think of anything with my grandmothers, but now in my wife's family, and this doesn't involve a grandmother, but one of my wife's relatives, when she was much younger and had babies, my wife's cousins, she was breastfeeding one of them, and they had thrush, and that got on her body. Well, this man they go to church with is the seventh son of a seventh son. And in front of her husband, so it was okay, he breathed onto her breast and the thrush went away. Is what I'm told. Now, I didn't lay witness to that, so don't take me at my word.
Wow.
This is what I'm told. But it's things like that you're always hearing, the horseshoes above everybody's door in the upright position.
You see that? Yeah, you see that everywhere. I mean, you can't go by a barn and not see the upright, horseshoe hanging above a door. And that's, that goes back with all this folk magic kind of stuff. But for me, I'm a little different. My family, we are Appalachia through and through. I actually was talking to my dad earlier today because I really wanted to talk to my mama, but I knew that if I started drilling her with a lot of these questions, and I remembered some things, that she says, some superstitions, some phrases and stuff that she's had, as far back as I can remember, but I didn't want to go to her just because, like I said earlier, I knew if I started drilling her, she's going to be like, okay, what's this about? And then when I have to say, oh, well, I'm trying to tie this into, you being a granny witch, that wouldn't have been pretty. I mean, I already get whipped with a switch, almost every time I show up because I need that.
It's good for you.
Yeah. You need this correction because I know you're still getting in trouble. That's what I hear. So, like a lot of things that she she will talk about the weather, what the weather's going to do, regardless of what the weatherman says or what's going on. That's not how she does. She'll watch the goats in the field. And if the goats head to shelter, then she knows that it's going to rain or storm or, some kind of bad weather will be coming shortly. She talks about, she's always said, if you're walking in the house with one shoe on and one shoe off, that's bad luck. Opening an umbrella in the house, that's bad luck. There's like 100 different things that's bad luck. You can't, if you breathe the wrong way, it's bad luck. But my dad was, and she used to, I remember when I was younger, she would make like sawgrass, just like the sawgrass, the brown, almost dead kind of stems when it gets really high. I remember that she used to go pick that and make tea. She would boil it and make tea out of that sawgrass to lessen and relieve fever, flu symptoms and stuff. I remember that she used to say that all the time. So little things like that, but I'll share a story here really quickly before we dive into it, just so the listeners and the viewers kind of get an idea of the things that we're talking about. I was talking to my dad earlier, and I was saying some of these things that I remember my mama doing growing up. And he said, oh, Justin, he said, you think she was bad with all this stuff? He said, your great grandma, his mama, my grandma's mom said it was constant. They didn't use medication. Nothing was over the counter. Everything was some sort of herbs, the plantain plant, the aloe, all these like mountain berries, he was calling them. I don't even know exactly what he's talking about. He was talking about all of these different plants and herbs and all this stuff that she would go and pick to treat ailments, sickness, whatever. Well, one story that he told me, his brother, my Uncle Bill, when he was really, really young, he had seizures. He would convulse. My dad didn't say seizures. He just said he would take these convulsions. So he had, they were taking him all these different doctors, and especially around that time, doctors in this area, I'm sure, were probably subpar. So they actually sent him to a specialist in Wise to get a spinal tap done, at like 4 or 5 years old. Well, they couldn't, which was super dangerous then because they really had no idea what they were doing. I mean, they were just poking and prodding. And so let's see what fluid we can find. So let's check and see if he's got meningitis. So they took him to the specialist, didn't find anything out. So he said that he actually remembers this. They were at her house that day, and he had a really bad convulsion, a seizure. And, it lasted for, he said, a really long time. So while it was going on and while they were kind of holding him down and keeping him on his side, keeping him from hurting himself, she said, I'm done with this. We got to do something for this baby or he ain't going to make it. He said, so his mama just took off up in the woods, up a big holler that was around where they lived. He said she took off up in the woods and was gone for 3 or 4 hours. He said, now he knows that, up at the top of that holler, there was a bunch of cow pastures and, just different things that were up around there. And she was gone for 3 or 4 hours. And she comes back, and he said she had an armload of stuff. He said he said he knows that he's seen ginseng and yellow root and these mountain berries. But other than that, he said, I can't tell you what it was. And he said, I've even asked my mama, his mom, after that, and she don't know what it was. But she went and picked all this stuff. She boiled it all together, strained it, boiled it again. He said he remembers she boiled it twice, boiled it again, poured it out in separate pint-sized jars, and gave it to my mama to give to Bill. And she told him to drink one of those a day and hopefully it would help. Dad said that he remembers that my Uncle Bill had maybe 1 or 2 more episodes like this of convulsions afterwards and has never had another one. Now, here's the thing, and here's a crazy thing that he was telling me. He said the reason that nobody knew what she did is because their belief, as far back as he could remember in their family, if they did something to help somebody else or to treat something or to do whatever in any kind of way, you can't talk about it. Because if you speak about it, here's his exact words. If you speak about it, it loses its power. Now, to me, I was just like, that's magic. Literally what you're talking about right now is magic. He talked about now, and here's another thing that he said. Like, I was just figuring all this out today, and it was blowing my mind. I'm sorry you guys hear that dog barking. My dog's out here going crazy. I don't know what's going on. I'm sorry. I apologize. But he was talking about how there were only certain women in the family. He said they never spoke with it, anything that they did or learned from each other to the men. They never talked to the men about it. He said, and they only shared this kind of information and these treatments with certain girls, with certain women in the family. He said, and they had to look at these girls and find out if they had the gift before they would share the information. Nuts, man. It's nuts. It's nuts. And I never knew any of this.
Yeah,
it's crazy.
The more I got to look into this, I was like, again, we were all 3 of us aware that this was a thing, right? And had heard these things, but didn't really realize the depth at which this kind of is really steeped in our culture. And And when you get to
give me just a second, I'll be right back.
All right, when you get to talking about some of the other things that you see that we've been talking about, and you all, I guess not we, you all have been talking about. Sorry, consider myself part of the podcast now. Been on twice, I'm part of the podcast now. But some of the things that you all have kind of mentioned, I was like, it just kind of falls right in line with a lot of the same type of, I don't know, interesting lore and things that have kind of been happening. So those just, again, really good examples of things that, again, we're used to. I guess people outside of our culture, out from the outsiders or people that aren't used to the Appalachian way, would think that's absolutely nuts. But to us, it's just kind of commonplace. Another good example of this, a gentleman that I work with in the town of Appalachia had, when he was younger, had really bad warts and couldn't get rid of them. There was a guy down there that was a seventh son of a seventh son that would go down, and he tells the stories that he tried everything. They tried what is it? Some kind of thing you can buy, something E, I think, or something W, some kind of solution you can put on them. I don't know exactly what it's called. You can wart remover like this. And we're talking like the early 2000s, right? This is just not that long ago. He was a kid, even 20 years ago or so. They try the wart remover and try all these things to get rid of them. He wouldn't work. Nothing worked. And they told him, his grandpa, his papa told him to go down to meet this guy. He was the seventh son of a seventh son. And he came up to him and showed him the wart, and he said, "Let me buy that off of you." And he said, "What are you talking about?" And he said, "Let me buy that off of you for a penny." So they exchanged a penny, and he said, "Now put his hand over the wart, rubbed it, and said, you can't think about it. If you think about it again, it'll stay. But if you don't think about it, it'll go away." Guy was like, "Okay, whatever." He said, didn't think nothing about it. He said 3 or 4 days later, he was washing his hands after he'd been out like splitting wood, and he had some dirt and stuff, and was coming in and looked down and realized that the wart was just completely gone. So he'd been trying for years and years and years to get rid of it. And that he was just, that guy had done that for a multitude of people, but because he was a seventh son of a seventh son, he could kind of get rid of those warts and done that a lot, which is an absolute. And the guy that told me this is one of my good hunting buddies. Like he's a pretty straight shooter. He's not going to make stuff up.
Dude,
so it definitely happened to him.
That is crazy. That's crazy that you just said that, because Dad also told me a story today that his Uncle Bunyan, yes, his name was Bunyan.
Was it Paul?
Not Paul. I don't think it was Paul. I don't know. I'm finding out a lot of things.
Did he have a blue ox?
I'm finding out a lot of things I didn't know about my family, okay, after starting this podcast.
Well, I'm finding out a lot of stuff tonight, too. Apparently, you're Nazi witches.
Scots-Irish were Celtic Nazi witches. Celtic Nazi.
Oh, we're getting there. We'll go there in a second.
Let's don't. No, I'm not a Nazi. Not. let's don't even say that. Well, I mean, yeah. Anyway, it's crazy though that you said that, because he talked about his Uncle Bunyan. This is no lie. I'm not. Oh my gosh, this is nuts. Dad said that when he was about Rachel's age, my daughter Rachel, which is around 8 years old, that his uncle, that he had these warts on his hands. He said that were really embarrassing. He couldn't get rid of them, and he was embarrassed by them, going to school and all this. They were huge. He said, so his Uncle Bunyan, this is crazy, came up to him, handed him a penny, told him that to take that penny and to speak over that penny and ask for the warts to be gone. Dad said, so I'm a little kid. I'm thinking, okay, yeah, I'll do that. He said, so he got it. He spoke over it. His uncle took the penny back, rubbed the penny over the warts, and then told Dad, take that penny, go bury it, and don't think about it ever again. Don't go back for it. Don't go dig it back up. Don't go near it, and don't turn around and look back. Once you bury it, don't look back at it. Just go on about your business. Dad said within a couple weeks, those warts were gone completely. So it is nuts that you just told that story, because that was one that I wasn't going to, because, as my uncle, he wasn't a granny, but still it was the same kind of, it's the same concept. It's the same principle.
It's all granny magic, right? And even as you get into this, you realize that some of this faith healing A lot of times it is this, it's like the seventh son of a seventh son can do these things. And it's, it's not a woman doing them, but it was passed down by a matriarch of a family who passed it on to the seventh son of a seventh son. It's the way it's passed. These traditions and things are passed in the way they have to be passed. Like you said, looking at them, the child, and making sure if they have the gift or not. It's all wrapped up into the same granny magic folklore and ritual and things that happened. And if you do a Google search, you got faith healing, right? Which is kind of what this is. It's usually three major categories that the things that these people can do. And a lot of times it's men, right? I don't know if you've heard of the one that can blow out fire. If you ever heard of that one at all?
No.
So what that is if you got a burn, right? If you say you get your hand burned, or you did something, these faith healer, granny magic people, whatever, can put their hands, cup it over and blow. And it's essentially, they say, if you get a burn, even though while your skin's not actually on fire, it still feels like it's burning, right? That scientifically, we know the nerve endings get burnt, and it just keeps sending those impulses, right? That fire down. It doesn't actually cause any more damage, but it feels like it's still burning. Well, they say things over that whoever one of these guys that can do these things, or ladies can do these things, they call it fire blowing. It's another seventh son of a seventh son. You blow into the fire, and it takes the pain, takes the burning sensation away. Now, I thought that was crazy. Another individual that we work with, her husband is a seventh son of a seventh son, and he can do this. She burnt herself with a curling iron, and couldn't, like she said, it was excruciating pain. And he came in, wouldn't let her wouldn't let her kids into the room at all, but said something, prayed over it, and then blew on it, and it took the pain away. And she said, "No, I can't." Anybody didn't know it has to be a seventh son of a seventh son. That's one that you hear. The thrush one that Ryan was talking about is a very common one as well, blowing into the area where the thrush is at to get rid of it. Another one is what they call blood binding, and it doesn't sound. It's not as eerie as it sounds. Essentially, if somebody is bleeding with unnatural causes, right? So they get cut or have a wound that is bleeding, these faith healers have the ability, apparently, to make sure and stop the bleeding. If they can't get it, sutured up or tourniquet in any way, they can kind of stop the bleeding. Now, I haven't have anybody around that I've talked to that knows people that have done that. But I have read and seen tons of accounts looking at this of people being not even in the same room, just hearing that somebody is bleeding somewhere and having something that they say and do, and then being able to say whatever, and the bleeding just boom, just turn off. Like it clots. It's almost instantly. And there's tons of accounts of that taking place. So that's some of the faith healing division, of granny witching, would be a kind of good way if you wanted to group it kind of all together. There's different things, there's rituals they do, there's the herb stuff they do, the mixing up of tinctures and stuff that you're talking about with your great grandma, and then the faith healing division of it as well. Foxfire books, Foxfire Chronicles. I don't know if you have any idea what that is, but the Foxfire Chronicles were a teacher back in the 70s. People can fact check me on this one. I didn't write this one down, but back I think the 70s, started writing articles in papers. I think it was in Tennessee. It was just high school students in their teacher were just collecting Appalachia things, right? Hog dressing, building a log cabin, how to what time to sow your seeds in the garden, moon phases, and it's kind of like an extended farmer's almanac of just Appalachia stuff that they were putting into newspapers, and it started to get a lot of attention. And eventually it's now branched into, I think, 6 or 7 books called the Foxfire Chronicles that goes over all of these different things, right? The first book has hog dressing in it. It has, I'm trying to think, I've got it here at the house. I don't have it with me right now. It's got a variety of things in it, but one of the things in one of the divisions in it is faith healing. Justin, I think I sent you a picture of it.
You did. That's what I'm
and log cabin building, I think, is one of the sections in there. But anyways, one of the sections in there is faith healing. And you open up, there are pictures and accounts of these older people being able to do these very things that we've been talking about, all of it kind of right in line with this Granny Witch kind of idea. So this is, again, something that is steeped in Appalachia. So
yeah.
Go ahead.
It's man, it's just, all this is crazy, because it's like, I was talking to Ryan about it a few days ago, and talking to my dad a little bit about it. It's all stuff, all these superstition, all these little things. You were talking about the blowing out the fire, and it made me think of when I was younger. If someone had an earache, they would blow cigarette smoke into their ear and say that was supposed to help it. I mean, it's probably, secondhand smoke, COPD now, but whatever. But, all of these things we grew up with, and even if you didn't realize it at the time, what was being said. And Monica's mom, my wife's mom, my mother-in-law, she's the world's worst with all these superstition things. Like, everything is some sort of, just like I was talking with my mama earlier, it's this is bad luck. This is bad luck. This is good luck. My right palm's itching. That means I'm going to get some money. My
ears are burning. Somebody's talking about you.
My ears are burning. Somebody's talking about me. My nose is itching. That means somebody's coming. Just all these different things that you never really think.
That sounded terrible.
All these different things that you don't think about at the time, but it's all steeped in this tradition. Like, everything is steeped in this tradition.
All right, so I think we've laid a pretty good foundation here of what this is. Right?
Oh yeah.
So when I started looking into this, my first thought was, this didn't just appear from nowhere, right? It wasn't one of these things that all these different people from all these different, back 1800s, even early 1900s, Great Depression era, like, people weren't traveling around and seeing each other. You had hollers where people were very isolated. You had communities that were close knit, but they were very isolated, and they wouldn't go out and see other people, right? But all these same different people were doing the same thing. So it had to have come from somewhere, right? It doesn't just appear out of nowhere. So the first question is, where in the world did this come from? Like, where does this? How does this happen? Where does it come from? And then this is where things get a little bit interesting. As I kind of got into this, now I'm not one to try to make connections. I just accept things for as they are, and then when I get done with it and kind of look back at it from a bird's eye view, while I was unable to see the forest for the trees while I was in the middle of it, once I kind of got done with some of the research, there were trees everywhere that I couldn't deny, that I think will be very interesting to a lot of the same things you have been mentioning on this podcast now for the last several months. And I even to the point where I was trying to not connect these things and make them just be their own separate idea or theory, but it just all kind of kept coming back to the same place, which I think is going to be really interesting once everything kind of comes together. It may never come together, but I think this is another, Justin and Ryan, another dot to the connect the dot puzzle that we are dealing with, if that makes sense.
We're talking project A and P.
I think we are. I really, at first I didn't think this was. I messaged you to say, hey, this is a lot of fun to talk about. I think people will enjoy this. I've enjoyed looking at it. But once I crawled back out of the rabbit hole, Ryan, this week, and I had to reach up with two hands and do a couple of pull-ups and suck me back down and pull it back up again and get myself up out of the rabbit hole, and got to looking at my putting things together to talk about, gathering my thoughts. So I wasn't just rambling on about stuff. There's a lot of connections here to some interesting things that I think, and maybe not. And maybe once we get done with this and you think maybe I'm pushing too far or think I'm reaching too far, and that's fine.
I bet I won't.
Grasping at too many straws, that's perfectly fine. But I think there's a lot of connections here. All right, so where did this come from, right? That's the biggest thing. I have to know the history. Had this happen? So let me pull up a little thing here. Granny magic, usually a broad term with a whole bunch of folk magic. Granny magic kind of combines two old legacies, okay? Mystic Christianity, which is not as eerie as it sounds. It's actually mystic Christianity, just kind of means the supernatural parts of Christianity. So like healing and that kind of stuff. And then Native American spiritualities as well. Granny women and men, hex doctors sometimes referred to from kind of the outside world. But all these things kind of generate this same type of folk magic, granny magic. Now, let me ask you two boys this, two intelligent men. And pull my Zoom back up. When you get together, the whole bunch of your buddies, or you get a whole bunch of people together, having a conversation about something, what do you call it? Getting together and having a what?
What is a gab session, Alex?
Close. That's very close, Ryan. What I'm looking for. Another name for a gab session. Another name for a brainstorm.
A powwow.
Boom. Okay.
Native American. I should have thought about that.
Granny magic, oftentimes referred to as a powwow. Now, the book on granny magic, yes, there is one, is called The Book of Powwows. And it was written in the 1800s by a Pennsylvania native that wrote powwows. The book is called The Powwow or A Long Lost Friend. That's the title of the book. And you can Google that, PDF it, and read. I did that this week. A lot of interesting stuff. A ton of these folklore, like, knocking on wood, that kind of stuff in there. Really, really interesting, fun to read stuff. But that is called a powwow. Okay. So granny magic in a whole is kind of referred to sometimes as a powwow, which I thought was super interesting because I use that phrase a lot. I get together and have a powwow. Right. That's something that's common vernacular for me on a daily basis.
Yeah.
So this form of magic dates back to the very first European settlers who showed up in the Appalachian Mountains, arrived around the very late 1700s, early 1800s, and they came from, you guys know your history. Where did they come from? Where the first sailors? Ireland and Scotland.
Ireland
and Scotland, exactly. Keep that in mind. That's going to become important to us here in about 5 minutes. Okay. So the first people that settled into Appalachia were from Ireland and from Scotland. Now, in our area specifically, like where we live at here specifically, in the heart of the Appalachian Mountains, especially the eastern Kentucky, southwestern Virginia portion, eastern Tennessee portion, there has been 3 or 4 different Native American tribes that would come in and were here for a little while, but none of them actually settled here. And then there were other people that kind of came. There was never any actual settlements here until the mining business and all that kind of took on in the late 1800s, okay, or the early to middle 1800s. And I think there is a reason for why we never see Native American people. They would come here and hunt, do other things. They would never come here and settle. I think there is a reason for that. That's another story for another time. It's another theory. It's another rabbit trail I'm chasing right now anyways. So those are the type of people, our ancestors, essentially, those are the type of people that settled here. And if you go and look, so you got that type of ancestry. You also have Native American cultures around at the time and their spiritualities that were in the area as well. And that brings along something else that Appalachian women in the 1800s did practice something called hoodoo. Now, not voodoo, but hoodoo, Hoodoo. And do you two fine gentlemen know what hoodoo is?
Magic.
Probably. What type of magic do you know specifically?
Yeah, it's what Marie Laveau was in that song. She was a hoodoo queen.
She was a hoodoo queen. That's exactly right. But if you look up a definition of hoodoo specifically, it's known as conjuring and root working, right? And root working, as in you mentioned ginseng, yellow root. That's hoodoo. Okay, it's a thoroughly American system of magic, very unique to Native American and European magical concepts, with a smattering of other folklores kind of mishmashed in there into this huge melting pot into the American South. Okay, sometimes confused with voodoo, which is deep South Louisiana, the area. That's not what this is. Okay, they don't even share the same origins. Voodoo comes from Africa, right? Hoodoo comes more from Central African tribal folklore. Voodoo comes more from Western Africa origins. So hoodoo uses a great deal of prayer, and incorporates a whole bunch of psalms as kind of invocation. So quoting the psalms, mentioned saying something over the thrush on the lady that was breastfeeding. It was probably quoting some type of psalm, and then having, doesn't really have a specific theology, but would using the scriptures. That brings us back to the mystical Christianity, supernatural type of healing that we spent 15 minutes kind of talking about. Okay, that type of psalm invocation, used by Catholics, used by Protestants, spiritualists, neo-pagans, that's used now a lot of times. Practitioners of these kind of things use the invocation of psalms while, showing, Psalms 23, right? We use that one a lot, just, something that we write on things or have hanging in our houses, or that's all kind of stems from the same thing. Okay. So that's kind of where this whole thing sort of came from, right? So you've got a mixture of Native American spiritualism, which we know is very earthy in its origins. It's very, very nature friendly. Nature explains a lot of things. You can use nature to do all these things, and then you tie that in with some mystical Christianity things and supernatural healings that happens in the Bible, right? And then we've actually talked about some of these kind of crazy things. It's supernatural. That's what it is, right? It's a mystical type of healing. So it blends those two things together. Okay, so that's kind of where that came from. So we've got Scot-Irish origin, Native American origin, kind of blending in to make this grainy magic folklore that we know and love today. All right, which is super interesting, I think. Does that make sense so far? We're good so far. Am I being clear on what's going on? All right.
Yeah. So
knowing the natives, now I've got two, as I'm studying, kind of researching this, I've got two things here to look at, right? I've got Scot-Irish history. What portions of that bled into this, that they started this folklore, and the Native American. Those are two things I have to figure out their origin as well, right? So I can kind of get a basis of where I know how it got to Appalachia, but how did it start, right? So that was my next step in what is grainy magic. All right, so Native American lore, I went there first because that's what I knew the most of, just commonly read and kind of had an idea about. Now, it is said, plenty of accounts that you can read. These old, again, some of this in the Foxfire Chronicles that I've read, other just articles and things that I've found on grainy folklore type thing, Appalachian faith healing papers that people have written. There is a whole bunch of evidence for these grainy witches, which I don't even really call them that, because it's kind of not what they are. But these grainy witches having, in the 1800s, having contact with, or having helped them do these healings or make these potions or make these tinctures or whatever, being in contact with small Native American people. And it wasn't just like one or two accounts that there was a multitude of these in which like people's great grandmas had small Native American, to put it really simply, had little Native American friends that they lived close to or knew that would help them kind of create these things to help their sick children, to help their sick husbands, all this type of stuff. And I was like, little Native American, what? Native American little people. I've never heard what is going on. I've never heard of this. This has got to be crazy. Well, it's not actually. There has been several books and all kinds of things written. I'm going to reference just one because I don't have time. We don't have time to do all of them. But one in particular is a book called Cherokee Little People Were Real. That was written by a lady named Mary A. Joyce. Now, Mary A. Joyce has her website that she runs. She's a UFO aficionado. She's in everything that's wild and weird. She's all about it, right? She doesn't just put a tinfoil hat on like she bleeds tinfoil. That's kind of where she's at. Like that's what she does. Okay.
So like my kind of lady.
Yeah, but she's very, very evidence-based in everything that she puts out. Like she wants pictures, she wants videos, she wants newspaper articles. Like she's not just making things up. She's finding good hard evidence for the stuff that she's putting out there. In her book, Cherokee Little People Were Real, she goes into several accounts, the 1920s or 30s. And yeah, I'm paraphrasing a little bit, that when they were building Western Carolina University, they were breaking the ground, which is supposed to be totally virgin ground, never been tilled or dozed or anything. As they were digging up the footers and foundations for these buildings, they found all kinds of tunnels. And these weren't like tunnels like Mammoth Cave System tunnels. That's not what we're talking. We're talking like tunnels that had been created, that were man-made, that had pictures and stuff painted on the walls, and they were very, very small. Like the men had to crawl on their hands and knees just to get through them. They found artifacts, they found like pottery, they found all kinds of stuff that in these tunnels that looked like people had lived there and had been there not that long ago. That led her to finding all other sorts of information that eventually, at some time in our area, there was a Native American tribe of Cherokees, Cherokee Indians, or Cherokee Native Americans, I guess, to be politically correct, that were short and that were smaller in stature, right? That were not, not normal size, but not regular sized Native Americans as we kind of know them and see them portrayed. Like they were Native Americans, full-blooded Native Americans. They were just a smaller version of it. Okay. And that was she's like, and like even today, she will still occasionally put accounts on her website of men and women who were, not crazy people, who were just regular people that work and have families and that we would consider just normal red-blooded Americans, that still seeing these Cherokee little people in the woods, still having experiences seeing them today. So I thought that was really interesting that she never mentions granny magic, never mentions granny folklore at all. Like she never talks about it, but she does have a whole bunch of information about these Cherokee little people. And I just thought it was really interesting that lined up with a whole bunch of accounts of great-great-grandmamas having a little Native American friend that helped them create these teas and stuff to help heal. I thought that was really interesting. Okay. So, and then there's a whole other ton of Native American spirituality, folklore that we know and that we've seen visualized to us in books and movies for years and years and years, right? That's all pretty common knowledge. The same chants and having we boys are fans of Yellowstone or not. I'm a huge Yellowstone fan, but Jace has to go in there at the end of the last season. He's going through a whole thing to get rid of some of his personal demons, right? That he's having to deal with. That's kind of stuff that we know. So I thought it was interesting, first of all. So we've had these little Native Americans that are helping these old Appalachian people, women, coming up with these, using their culture to help the Appalachian culture at the time. Okay. So then I went to the other side of the Irish, Scot-Irish history and figured out where does this folklore come from? And the Irish and Scottish people, even today, right? If you go over to Ireland or Scotland today and get to talking about their history, what is their mystical thing that they all believe in? The what?
The
Fairies.
The Fae, right? The Fae. And I thought that was really weird that, just because, just to humor me here, just describe to me what the Fae is or a fairy is. Just humor me.
The wee folk, the little people.
Yeah, the leprechauns, right?
Bingo, bango, bongo. Little people.
The little
everywhere,
people, right?
Everywhere.
Yeah, everywhere. And then the changelings, right? The changelings that can do all these things. And there's a whole folklore of changelings that are good changelings and bad changelings, and all the things that the Irish people, well, Scottish people have the same thing, right? It's steeped in the same mystery. They have the same things that they believe in. So you take those fairies, right? The Fae, I call them the Fae. Fairy sounds a little more fairy tale-ish, but if you call them the Fae, it makes it sound more official. I don't think, whatever. That's just in my brain, that's how it works. So now in Appalachia, right? In Appalachia, you have 1800s. You've got people who are, and what do we know about the Irish and Scottish? They believe what they believe, right? I mean, they are
sure.
What you can't convince them otherwise. Like, they are convinced in that. Okay, what do we know about Appalachian families?
Same way.
Right? They're set in their ways, right? They believe what they believe, and they're set in their ways, and
they'll die on that hill.
And they'll die on the hill. And they even if they know they are wrong, they will not admit that they are wrong. That's just the way that we are. It's the way we are as people. Okay, so we've got that going on, and then you bring in the little Native American people with their spirituality ideas and you put that and drop that into an Appalachian culture, you get granny magic. Okay. And all of other things that we've talked about. Okay. So now you've got grannies, folklore, witchcraft, we'll call it that for a lack of a better term, faith healing. You've got the Fae. You've got little Native American people, and then all of the Native American spirituality culture as well dropped into Appalachia. That's what we know as granny magic, and that's our Appalachian folklore. Okay, now, who is the one occult? Because I like to bring things back to the occult. Who's the one occult person that deals with the Fae?
Pan,
right? Pan is absolutely, when you think about fairies or the Fae, or a description of the Fae, especially in the New Age occult, which we know it as it is now, Pan is kind of the guy or the god or whatever, the demigod that deals with the Fae. The Fae are always around, right? The Fae are always in his magic, are always in his stories, are always in his folklore. So much is fact that you could probably not make it too far of a reach to call Pan the god of the fairies, right? You really probably could. It's not a technical actual name for Pan, but it's not too far of a reach to say that he is god of the fairies or god of the Fae or whatever the case may be. So up until like post-Depression, pre-World War II, granny magic as we know it was very, very wholesome. And was faith healing, was steeped in quoting of scriptures. As a matter of fact, I mentioned the book of powwows. There's the sixth and seventh book of Moses is another Appalachia granny magic book that essentially takes each psalm. Again, you can PDF this. You can go the sixth book of Moses and seventh book of Moses PDF. It will bring it up, and it goes psalm by psalm. Essentially, you say this psalm, and it can cure this, and this. Right? Whatever the case. There's a thousand of them. Right? You can read them. I've read. I probably spent 3 hours reading them this week just because they're really interesting. If you say this psalm, and one of them was like, if you've got a friend that has a really bad odor, And again, it's written in Old English. It's written much more better than I'm saying it. But if you have a friend that's got a bad, that's dealing with a bad odor, you say this psalm, you get him to take a bucket of water that's never had the sun on it at all, and pour it over his head, and then dip his feet in the bottom of it, and that will help take the smell away. Which is pretty much a fancy way of saying take a bath, right? I mean, that's pretty much what that is.
Yeah, that was just a bath. That's
exactly.
where the smell went. That's not magic.
Exactly, but there's
all kinds. Soap.
Yeah, there's all kinds of those things in there in the book of the 6th and 7th book of Moses. That kind of, so up until up until post Depression, pre-World War II, this was, and even in the 60s and 70s, right? This was a very wholesome way of life. And as people got better access to doctors, right? The reason that, like, my mom, so my kid's grandmother, we don't do a lot of these things, and you all aren't doing a lot of these kind of same things with your families and your kids, because we just have, it's easy for us to run the kids down to after hours, or go get them, call, the dial a nurse or whatever it is to get them the medicines that they need. We have better access to more things, and that's why we're not really doing these things, right? It's just kind of why this is, we still know them, but like my kids' generation aren't going to have as much knowledge of these things as like we had, just because it's going to get farther and farther removed, right? It's just kind of the way things work. And that was the case. So what's happening now is that granny magic, granny witches, we can call them that when we're referring to them today, they have adopted the folklore from the old Appalachia, but they are now entrancing this into the New Age cult, and using the terms and using some of the ritualisms and some of the potions or teas or stuff, and then warping that into using what we would now know today is the New Age cult. The Wiccans and that kind of thing are using this as well, which I thought was incredibly, incredibly interesting. Okay, so you've got something that started out Scot-Irish, steeped in fairies, that, again, Native American little people and its spirituality, dropped it into Appalachia, and it has become a large portion of our history, and it's a large portion of our life today. But that's kind of what granny magic is, and I thought that was super, super interesting.
That is.
Wow. Dude.
That's awesome.
Man. Well, it's just like, that's what I was thinking because as you were talking, I was already making connections in my own brain, just based on, what we've been talking about and working on and working toward, and the research going into this, I was already making all these connections. Well, here's another crazy one that I was just telling Ryan earlier. You mentioned Pan being the god of the Fae. Okay. We don't have a lot of historical documentation, say, in early Scots-Irish. Okay. We don't have a lot there from the Celts, before they before the Romans came in, when the Roman Empire was conquering the entire world. The majority of what we have about those early cultures there is from the Romans. And then, 14th, 15th century, these places start getting really Christianized. You have all these missionaries coming in and converting all the people. But before this time, early Roman documentation on these places talk about the Celts and talk about these Druids, and most of us know what Druids are and how they, worship nature and used all these different things. But some of the early Roman documentation talked about how they were a polytheistic, had that basis, a polytheistic basis. And the gods that they were talking about, that they worshiped, the Romans would just associate them with their own gods. They would say, oh, well, they explain this god like this and this and this and this. That must be Mercury, or that must be, Jupiter, or, whatever. Well, I was reading right before, a little earlier today, that one of the early Roman accounts of a god that they worshiped. They said, some, especially these Druids, worshipped above all others was the god of the woods, the god of nature, and that was Cernunnos. Okay, Cernunnos is a Roman deity that is a horned deity and is most in common and most similar with Pan. So it's nuts that, and you're talking about the Fae. Well, if you have these 16th, 17th, 18th century Scots-Irish women coming over who have this strong belief in the Fae, and all of a sudden they come over here and they're encountering all of these Cherokee little people running around, what are they going to think it is? They're going to think, oh, well, that's just this land's version of the Fae.
Yep.
That's it. It's the same thing.
I believe Pan ties back to the old Celtic Druids, everything like that, and that's why it's here. That's why the Native Americans called this the Hall of Appalachia, right in this area, the dark and bloody ground, which is probably, when you were talking earlier, it's probably why they would come hunt here, but not set up settlements.
Exactly right. It's exactly right. Hunting here is great. Fishing here is great. Coming in, they could come in even for just a growing season, have really good crops, harvest it in the fall, and then get out of here and not actually set up any time. I'm right with you right there. I think the same thing, Ryan. I'm right on with you on that one.
There's a reason they didn't settle here.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. a lot of Native American tribes, or you hear people talking, kind of talking like we are with our mamas and mamas, grandmas, and their crazy faith healing granny witching ways. You hear a lot of these Native Americans giving accounts today, and they talk about how their ancestors called this a cursed land. This was a cursed land. The heart of Appalachia was cursed.
Yeah. And from sorry.
No, you're all right. You're all right. I was
from an anthropological standpoint.
That's a big word, Ryan. Wow. Good job.
What was the one thing I was talking to you about the other day? Going around and looking, I'd like to get a little LiDAR machine, banded Clovis. Oh. So before our ancestors settled this area, we know that early, I don't know what Homo genus they are, but earlier humans are not that kind, but they're not a homosexual genius. They're Homo genus. But we know they settled this. We know they settled this area, right? So it was obviously inhabitable, for people, and obviously still is since we're here. But for some reason, the Native Americans, who are more in tune with nature and everything else, the spiritual world, than anybody alive. That's
sure.
Yeah.
There's plenty of arguments that can be made on why they didn't settle here, right? I mean, you've got crazy weather, really hard winters. Terrain's not the greatest as far as setting up a whole, wigwam and a whole village full of people. It would be difficult. This land technically didn't get settled until after how many of these cities, or not cities, but towns and shopping centers are built on old strip mines, right? None of that stuff really happened until big corporation came in and kind of essentially knocked the mountains down and flattened some stuff out. And there's plenty of arguments to be made geographically on why this was not a great place to come and try to initially settle. And how hard was it on the early people in Appalachia that came and settled here while these companies were tearing these mountains and stripping this land and getting the coal and stuff out of it. How hard it was on them to survive just because of the terrain and the climate, and it's much easier on us now because it's civilization is much better, right? And technology is a lot better, but there's plenty of other arguments to be made. But you want to talk about things of high strangeness, which we like to talk about, you have to at least take into account that there are other reasons why the Native Americans never officially settled Appalachia.
I don't know if either of you have ever been to North and South Dakota, but I have in February, and Native Americans live there. Like, what was the Lakota tribe and all that? There is no more of an inhospitable place in this world than North Dakota in February. I don't know if anybody, we got any listeners in North Dakota, you guys, I'm sending coats next year. That's it is crazy cold.
Yeah. So what you're saying is
weather shouldn't play a factor. Like, there's got to be some other reason. They had to have a reason that they just refused.
Yeah, sure.
I'm with you, man. I'm really with you. And we keep talking about synchronicity. We keep talking about
synchronicity is just coincidence, Justin. Wrapped up in a fancy word.
No, well, we'll call it coincidence then. I don't care, but I'm going to be fancy. And I'm going to call it synchronicity because that sounds more high strangey. Okay. So, Ryan, this week you've told me to listen to 2 episodes of 2 different. No, it's the same podcast. They were both Wes's podcasts, but you told me to listen to 2 different episodes. In each of those episodes, what was talked about?
The lights, Bigfoot, of course, because it's Sasquatch Chronicles. A guy who had an identical story to yours.
Yeah, which was nuts. That's crazy.
Yeah, that's the only reason I want you to listen to that. But what was the one thing he talked about before that? Everything ties back to Pan.
And little people.
The little folk. The wee folk.
The Lakota guy that you just mentioned right then, the Lakota man was talking about all these little people, all these little Native Americans that would actually come and were menacing. You know, they were super, super, super little. They were menacing, you know, and when you would meet them out in the woods in their territory, you know, they were more hostile or whatever. But when they would come to your territory, they were just, you know, just playing pranks. Well, what does that sound like? That sounds like the Fae. That sounds like any Irish, you know, Scottish account that you get of the Fae, how they're just tricksters. You know, they do these different things. Which, I mean, if you listen to the Irish and Scottish people, they account everything to the Fae folk. You know, everything. Bigfoot sighting, any cryptid, UFO encounters, everything accounts back to the Fae.
Changelings, man. Changelings.
Yeah, it's changelings. But then the other guy, the guy that had almost an identical story to mine, he was talking about how he first went in search of these. They were Native American little people, cryptids, whatever you want to call them. They were covered in hair. They said they looked like Sesame Street characters or whatever. But still, they were a version of a little humanoid that was coming out and terrorizing people, attacking people, you know, and we're talking modern times. We're not talking, you know, we're talking these people are seeing these things now. And then you take into account the Hopkinsville Goblin and, you know, all that stuff going on there. Like within just the last little bit, we're finding accounts or finding out a lot about these little people stories and all this stuff going on everywhere, like all over the country, you know, hearing stories from.
And, you know, this just, you know, as soon as you said changeling, I just remember listening to an episode the other day about the, what are they called? The Pudgewuckies or the Pugwuckies.
That's what I'm talking about. The Pudgewuckies. That guy
Northeast,
was talking about those.
Like Massachusetts.
Oh yeah, it was Massachusetts. Yeah, it was Massachusetts.
So what do you have a lot of in Boston? Irish.
Oh yeah.
That's like
Irish,
I think that's
Irish
Ireland's capital, right?
Yeah,
that's
it's the Irish Hove.
Yeah. So let's take the word Pudgewucky or Pugwucky, whatever they call it, change it over to changeling. those being the evil things, like that account of that old man saying he was going, I think he was telling me to come here. He wanted me to follow him. But he's
That
like,
was
I turned
nuts.
and I went the other way. Even his dog, like this German Shepherd something mix, like 100-something pound dog, was just pissing itself and everything, like terrified. And this thing stepped out in the lights, is like 3 or 4 foot tall, had a pot belly, and was he wasn't speaking English, like, but the way it was doing, it was motioning, and it sounded like it was going, we want, oh, it was saying, we watch you, or he watch you, we want you. And it was going,
Kier.
Kier, come here. And it would say, he watch you, Kier. And he's like, I got the hell out of there.
Yeah.
He was 3 foot tall, man. Go whip that thing's ass.
Well, see, that was the thing. It wasn't coming, like it wasn't advancing toward him. It was standing back saying that, he watch you, Kier, like over and over. Yeah. So it was trying to motion this dude. And he said it was at the tree line. Like it was like back in the woods, like saying, dude, I'm getting chills just talking about, I would freak out if I seen a little
hole in that thing.
a little goblin speaking English to me, broken English. Yeah, but
rebuke.
So, well, you just said rebuke, and that was kind of going with my question here. So what do you guys think that this, what do y'all think that this is? I mean, do you think that it's actual, biological things that we haven't documented? Or do you think this is spiritual? Do you think this is something that has been, because Lance, you mentioned earlier, we know the Native Americans, we know their rituals and all the different stuff. And I've talked about it on here 100 times about how I believe that there were some, whatever you want to call them, portals, openings, whatever, probably open throughout these things that let some things through, other realities, other dimensions, whatever you want to think about all that. And then we're talking about, you said earlier, conjuring and then root work. Okay. What is conjuring? What's the conjuring part there in this whole, we talked about the root work. We didn't talk much about the conjuring.
It's basically a summoning.
Right. But when I was mentioning, I guess that I was talking more of kind of the incantation of, this saying,
right,
little sayings and things that we know and we have that kind of go along with all of this is kind of where I was.
Yeah.
That's what I was kind of meaning.
I get that 100%.
Didn't mean as in conjuring up spirits or conjuring up, whatever.
Well, I guess what I'm trying to say with this, though, if we're going to look at this from a magic standpoint, okay, if we're just going to say, whatever the basis was, however it was used, whatever the belief system behind it, I feel like a lot of this and magic, what really is magic more than just like energy works. So if we're going to talk about it like on the magic standpoint, magic can be used 2 different ways, right? Just like anything, you can use anything. It's not the product, it's the intent behind it, correct? I mean, it can be used for good or used for bad. So in these things, if these people, if these 7th sons of the 7th sons, or these certain women, these certain families, if they had the gift, we're talking about all the faith healing and all the things, but could they have used it for the other side of that too? I mean, could they have used it for dark, for evil?
For every action, there's an opposite and equal reaction, right? I mean,
yeah,
that's a law of thermodynamics, right? I mean, that's a pretty common idea. You push one way, you got to use that. You're getting that same force pushing back the other way. Now, you may not feel it; it may be just the stationary force, but regardless, you're getting a pushback. And throughout history, there's nothing but There's not just good or not just evil. There's always both.
We need to look this up, but your whole life, anything you've ever seen or read, any book, any movie, anything that you've ever seen that deals with magic, what is the number one rule of magic? It always comes with a price, right? Where did that statement come from? And are these the price of hoodoo, voodoo, witchcraft, whatever you want to call it? Are these things the byproduct, the opposite of what they were trying?
I don't know, man. I mean, it's crazy to think about. It's crazy to think about the possibilities that are there, because just like I said, I mean, if you're operating in this avenue and you don't have a full understanding of maybe what you're dealing with.
And nobody does.
Well, nobody, and there's no way.
I think that's largely the problem, is that you've got people who study this, sure, who have dove into all of these things that a variety of people have just kind of made up, right? Or have collected over the years, right? I mean, it's not like you can go to certain points in history and see where things started. But there's usually there's an explanation for why those things happened, right? It's just kind of like when COVID broke out 2 years ago and you flipped on Facebook and everybody was a freaking expert on infectious disease, like all of a sudden. And now you look on, everybody's an expert on foreign policy, right? I mean, it's this, you've got people who think they know these things, and they're dealing with what I think, and this, I won't die on many hills. I'll die on this one. I think when we talk about changelings or magic or supernatural things or people seeing stuff or any paranormal thing, I think it is 100% supernatural. I think it is 100% evil. I don't think it should be messed with. Again, this is a hill I'll die on, right? I think that it is not things that we should. You can look at it, you can study it, you need to understand it. You need to understand why it's here. You need to understand what's going on with it, the basis of it, but you don't need to practice or get involved with it, because nothing good can come. Again, this is just personal belief. I think nothing good can come from it. I think there's people in the occult now, these covens of witches and all the stuff that they're doing, all the ritualistic stuff that they're doing, that we can tie back to the occult, Aleister Crowley, the devil, all the stuff we can tie it all back to. I don't think any of it's good. I don't. I think people are messing with stuff that they don't need to be messing with, and it's why you have all these accounts of all this stuff. Now, I'm going to make this statement as well. I think here in Appalachia specifically, because of the history, because of what's going on here, I think the veil is thinner here than it is other places.
I agree 100%. And I don't think that you have to. I think all you have to do is look out there at the media and the entertainment that's out there for, every team is coming to somewhere in Appalachia. Expedition Bigfoot season 2, I was just watching a little bit of today. They're in Eastern Kentucky. Tony Merkel runs the Confessionals podcast, just did a Expedition Dogman documentary, came to Eastern Kentucky. The whole Hellier crew, all that came to Eastern Kentucky. Well, I mean, we are right on the border of Eastern Kentucky where all this stuff is going on. And, what are state line borders? I mean, they're imaginary lines. They mean nothing. Whatever is out there and going on, they don't care about that line between Kentucky and Virginia and Tennessee and West Virginia and North Carolina. They don't care about those lines. They're going to operate wherever. But there's getting to be such a microscope on this area. And it's not just people like us that are living here that are realizing that. It's people out there that run these gigantic media operations or whatever, production companies that are getting these stories. People are saying, I saw this, I've lived this is my account, this is my encounter, so I want to tell my story. So if I'm going to tell my story, who do I need to get up with? Who is going to do this justice? And that's why you have these people coming in. That's why you have this area being so, on almost everything that you look, we're investigating some part of Appalachia. And that's why I think this Project ANP, the anonymously named project, as our research producer, Lance, pitched my way. And I just loved it. That way I don't have to just call it the project anymore, guys. That's why I think this is so important, because we just talked about, as Appalachians, we like to keep some stuff close to us, close to the chest. We want to hold what's our own. We want to, if these people are getting these accounts and coming in and doing interviews and all this different stuff and putting in so much work, why can't we just talk to the people around us that we work with, like Lance has been doing, like me and Ryan have been doing? Why can't we just talk to our grandparents and our aunts and our uncles and our, people that we know that live in this area and have seen these things, had these encounters? That's what's so important about this. Well, that's what's important about this show in general, and about this project that we're working on, is the magnifying glass is on this area of the world right here. Who better than to keep a daily journal of that than the guys living in it?
Than us three.
The three amigos, three musketeers.
I like Snickers.
But no, man, I just think it's crazy. It's all crazy.
And I think, it's one of the reasons why I enjoy this show so much. One, because you and JK's project, and JK and I have been friends for many, many years. I'm going to support absolutely anything that he does, to a fault most of the time. But
let's go with anything.
But when you started, as I started listening, and we're kind of realizing, like, I think all three of us will say we are very proud to be Appalachian. Like, we don't try to hide our accents. We understand that most of the time this area of the United States gets a bad rap for the opioid problem that's going on, and the poor nature of the coal companies leaving, and the kind of the backwoods nature of just people who are pretty much predominantly introverted, and just, once you get to know them, are just super people that just don't like to talk and don't want to, have been beat down so much with, you're a dumb redneck kid who doesn't know anything, you're not educated, you don't have the same degree that I've got, so you don't know what I know. It's kind of created a stigma in which people, for the most part, are introverted and kind of reserved. But realistically, what it is, it's just, you've got people who are very strong in their beliefs, who are extremely resilient, who are family people through and through, that the blood is thicker than water is a literal way of life, but yet are just as articulate, just as intelligent, just as well versed in everything else, right, going on in the world, just like everybody else is. It just happens to be that we have more of a negative connotation on the way in which we conduct ourselves. That's why I think this platform and this show is so important, that, we talk about all these things, right? And we're diving into some of the stuff that other people are coming into. I get some stranger coming in and wanting to talk to them, I'm not gonna really open up. But if we're sitting around like this, and I bring a couple of my buddies over to meet you guys, we're just going to instantly kind of have a connection, just because of the way we grew up and where we live. We're going to be more open to have conversations, more open to talk about what we think about things. And because we don't have that fear of, this guy's going to think I'm an idiot, right? Because we all grew up and experienced a lot of the same things. We all didn't grow up the same way, but we've grown up and experienced a lot of the same things and have the same background. That's why I think it's important that whatever the topic was, right? We could be talking about the best way to go, gigging for frogs. And I think it's still important that, we have conversations and talk about the way, because I think I've got a passion for the Appalachian culture because of the way in which it has allowed me to now raise my family, right? Because of the way I was raised and the things I'm putting into them and the values and things that my wife and I are putting into my kids. I'm proud of it. And I think more people would benefit from it. And I think that's why you're seeing people move into our area and all kinds of stuff, because people will enjoy and appreciate what we are as Appalachians.
Yeah, man, I agree. That was beautifully said. Beautifully said.
Now, I can tell you, if you're looking to retire and move somewhere where you never have to interact with anyone, this is the place to come.
Yeah.
You don't have to interact with anyone. You can
And
don't
you can buy
expect don't expect an Uber.
You can buy some land in the holler and not have to see anybody. I mean, you can.
Yeah. And you talking right there, Lance. That's been one of the biggest. I won't say hang-ups, because we're getting guests on and we have people lined up and scheduled. But as far as just like personal stories, like I would love to have more people blowing us up with personal encounters and accounts and stories, their own thing. But the majority of people, especially in this area, they're not just going to open up. And if they do, I'm really good at breaking down barriers in a one-on-one, basis. Okay. Like I can get people talking to me or in a small group. But when you're talking, coming onto a show and where, hundreds, possibly thousands of people are going to be hearing this, then people start getting a little, they're keeping their cards closer to their chest. And that's this area, man. And it's exactly what you just said, because of the stigma that they've been beat down with their entire lives. They don't want the extra stigma of saying, oh, well, now I'm uneducated, I'm stupid, and I'm crazy.
That just goes into the uneducated, ignorant part. That's
well, I mean, and then Jess, I'm a great example of that, right? After our first podcast, and I'm a guy who can talk about anything. I don't usually I don't get embarrassed easy. Don't have much of a filter. Things just don't bother me. It's just kind of the way I've always been. But I mean, how many times I was like, after we got done, and just like he texted me like, "Hey, it was great." And I was like, "I don't know, man. I don't know if it feels that good." No, I don't know. And I was kind of falling in that same trap. Well, usually I was like, I don't really care, what people think or whatever. But I think it's just because of, this platform of, technically you put this thing out there and then there's 7 billion people in the world, and any of them can listen to it. And,
all of them are listening, all of them,
whatever the case may be. So I think that's, I get it. I understand why people would be, and, I don't consider myself a huge conspiracy theorist or even a crazy person, but there's some things here that are, I think there's reasons that we are seeing some of these things consistently pop up. I refuse to say synchronicities, but they're consistently popping up. I think there's reason for it. And that was, when you called a month or so ago and said, "Hey, there's things are going on." And I kind of giggled at you for a second. And then the more you talked, I was like, well, maybe. And then the more things have kind of kept going. I think there's definitely something here, and nothing else is a really, really, really good story. And if there's nothing, if there's absolutely nothing else here, right? If there's nothing else ever comes of any of this, I think we've got a really good story that we're going to be able to tell.
Write a book. I've always wanted to write a book.
Yeah. So I think that there is. And there's one more thing too that I want to say, and I want to get this out there. I want to say this. I don't think any of this is good. I don't. I think it's evil.
I think it's a pretty good podcast.
No, I'm not saying that. I agree. I completely agree. What I was referring to was, like, I think the things that we are seeing, or these accounts and the things that we have been talking about, and the way in which we're seeing these coincidences kind of pop up, and I'm talking to these people looking into all this stuff and talking about pain and fairies and witchcraft and demons and ghosts. I don't think I think if it's paranormal and it's bothering you, like it's trying to make itself known in some certain way, I think it all stems. Again, this is a Lanceism. It's just my theory on things. I think all of that stems from evil. I don't think there's anything. To me, there's no such thing as good ghosts, right? I don't believe in ghosts at all. I think anything paranormal that happens, I think it is demonic activity, trying to manipulate environment, manipulate what you're seeing, manipulate whatever the case may be, to get you to do more evil. That's just my thought. And I think that's important that you expose that, talk about that, call it for what it is. But don't jump into it and enjoy it, because it's going to be enticing and it's going to be fun to talk about and maybe fun to delve into. But I think if you dance that line too long, you'll fall off the cliff. Again, that's just my personal belief.
Well, there goes my idea. I was going to say maybe the reason we're so run down in this area is because we've let these old ways fall to the wayside, and the land just needs to be rejuvenated. Maybe we should do some kind of ritual and wake it back up. But I guess Lance is going to be against that.
I'm out. 100%.
Yeah,
man, I have my sacrificial dagger ready and everything.
I will not be lathered up myself in pig fat, naked on Halloween night, running around a fire with 2 sacrificial knives. That's not going to happen.
Well, there goes my other idea.
You in the background with horns with a headdress of horns over you. I'm not doing that. It's not.
What about beef fat?
Yeah, maybe. I can talk to that. Maybe.
No, I agree. I agree 100% with you, Lance. And we even had a conversation the other day, and you actually called me out on it. You said, "Okay, well, what's your theory behind this, and what do you want to do with it?" And my answer was, and it's the same kind of thing, that we use this as a cautionary tale type of, well, anything that we're talking about. This is a cautionary tale. This is we are men of faith, followers of Christ. We believe that the Bible is what it is, what it says. And we know there's a spiritual war going on. We know that that's out there. So if we, as men of faith, don't understand any of this, and I don't mean diving into it and performing these rituals or doing these things, that's not what I'm talking about.
Yeah, that's a joke. I would never do that.
Yeah. But if we don't at least understand it and understand what it is and where it comes from and why it may possibly be happening, and how we can kind of battle against that, I think that's important. I mean, if you're going to be in a war, if the general of this side has no idea how many troops, how well they're established, how many resources, supplies, ammunition they have, what they're using, what they're capable of, where they're flanking from, if one side doesn't know that, you're screwed. You're destroyed. You're defeated. So if we, as men of faith,
you're talking about me being the weak link in the faith department here. I see what you're saying. I'm the weak link, and I'm gonna get tackled, and then you guys are going down with me.
I didn't say
every army's got to have infantrymen, Ryan. We got to have the first line of defense to go.
That's what I'm saying. Operation Human Shield, baby. That's.
No, I'm just saying. I think it's important to understand, at least have an inkling of an understanding of what you're up against. Because whether you want to be or not, if you're a believer, you're in a spiritual battle every day. If you're not a believer, you're still kind of in a spiritual battle every day.
You just call it morality.
It's these people that are these forces that are keeping you back from the truth of what's real, what's important, what's truth. So that's what I think is important about this too, is we talk about it, we research it, it does get enticing. It does get interesting. It does make me excited when I'm learning more about this, but it doesn't make me say, okay, I want to dive into this as deep. I want to try to, do all these ritualistic. I want to try to conjure this and do that. And that it makes me want to do the absolute opposite. It makes me want to learn it, understand it, just like I am a general in a battle. And I am learning as much as I possibly can learn about the enemy. Now, I think these things are real. I think that people are seeing exactly what they're seeing. And I think based on worldview and, their belief system is how people are going to interpret that. I have my beliefs that I've spoke on this show before, and they match up and line up identically with what you just said. And I think that it's important that, I'm not going to have a guest on here. And if they're talking about this being, I'm not going to put them on blast and be like, no, you're wrong. It's a demon. It's blah, 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 blah. I'm not doing any of that, but I'm allowed to have my beliefs and that's what I'm, you have prepper podcasts to where people are on here just talking about, well, you need to prep for, the decline of the dollar and, you think of any apocalypse scenario that you can think of, that's what you need to prep for. Well, this is kind of a prepper show, only it's a spiritual prepper show, if that makes any sense. That's the way that I kind of see it too.
Don't count on me to have you spiritually prepared, folks. That's why I have Catholics pray for me. I'm shooting for purgatory.
Just always knows the right thing to say at the right time.
It's a blessing and a curse. It's a blessing and a curse because there are times that I've said shit before I realized what I was doing, and then shouldn't have said that.
All right, guys. Well, this has been awesome. It's been a lot of fun. Lance, again, you've crushed it. You came on and you crushed.
You brought the good stuff.
That's right, guys.
Something I wanted to tell you about also while we're on air. I was just thinking about this the other day. I actually got cracked. I was on gummies and I was high, and I actually got cracked up. And Ash was like, "What are you laughing about?" I was like, "Well, Lance is coming on the podcast Thursday." I was like, "He and Justin have been friends since they were little. Like they've known each other forever. They both love to talk, and I'm just cracked up at the thought of their parents like walking in the room and they're both passed out blue face because they were trying to talk over top of each other." That's how I imagine y'all's childhood. Like y'all's teachers just passing out because you're just talking and talking and talking and talking. No breathing.
Hey, I'm not gonna lie, it is hard for me a lot of times just to sit here and listen. And I'm like,
I know. What do we learn from Wes on Sasquatch Chronicles? Even Bobo from Finding Bigfoot. He says the number one thing we learned from you, Wes, was to shut the hell up and let the guests talk.
That's it. That's
Everybody
why they come on.
Notice I save my jokes for the right moments. But there's times I'm like, damn, I really don't want to step on them. But if I say it later, it's not going to be funny. So I'll just do it. But
no, again, Lance, thanks so much for coming on. This has been a great episode. It's been a lot of fun. And guys, if you're out there listening, look into this stuff. I mean, research it for yourself. I mean, I know sometimes we sound like some crazy people on here, but I promise you, we're not talking about anything that's not out there to be seen, read, watched. It's out there. But again, Lance, thanks so much, man. We appreciate you, and we appreciate everything you're doing for the show as the research producer and all these people that you've been talking to.
It's just producer.
No, I like research producer right now. That's what he's doing.
He doesn't go over anything with anybody, so get used to that. Research producer. He's just going to make up shit on the fly, and you're just like, what's that word? Never heard of that before.
I've called him research producer for like 2 weeks, and I mean,
you never said research producer. I've always just said producer, and you're like, yep. And then we start recording tonight, and it's research producer. I'm like, I don't even know what the hell he's talking about. That's Lance, I don't know what you are. You're just part of the podcast.
All right. I'll give Lance. Let Lance say his goodbyes, Ryan. My gosh, you keep jumping in.
Goodbye, Lance.
What's the Cowboys say? It's not goodbye. It's see you later.
Yeah. See you soon.
Guys, check us out. Check us out on our social media. Follow us on all of our social medias. They'll be posted in the show notes. Subscribe to our YouTube channels. Ryan has been doing a great job getting all the videos put up there soon after the episodes are completed recording. If you
Ever since last week. I was 3 behind.
I'm trying to
I do apologize. I did want to apologize for that to everybody. I will be on schedule from now on with Justin, midnight Saturday. Well, technically Friday night. Justin's watching the Braves right now, in case y'all are wondering why he keeps looking away.
Game's over. They lost.
Oh, I knew it. Go Buccos. But Pittsburgh Pirates.
Both y'all are.
Lance, are you a Buccos fan?
Steelers. I'm a Pittsburgh fan through and through.
I forgot about that. Good God.
I'm not a Steelers fan. I'm a Green Bay fan, but I am a Pirates and Penguins fan.
Oh yeah, I'm a huge Penguins fan.
They're just the best.
Oh,
God, can y'all just let me kick the show? Can we end it?
Sorry.
Yeah, so everybody check us out on our socials. We have Twitter. We have Instagram. We have Wait, do we have Facebook?
Yes.
Oh, we have Facebook, folks. I just learned that. The YouTube channel, of course, Appalachian Intelligence. Please like, subscribe, rate, review, share. All the shit.
If you like what you're hearing, you can support the show. The support the show link will be in the show notes as well. We are getting ready still. I know I keep saying that. We will be setting up a Patreon pretty soon. We'll be teasing that before we get it out there to and send us your stories, guys. Send us your stories. Look, if you want them to be told on here anonymously, we'll do that. If you want to speak with us and us not put the video on YouTube, just use it audio, we'll do that. Whatever you want to do to protect whatever it is that you want to protect, we'll do that. We want to hear your stories. We want to hear your encounters. We're reading stories all day long. And when we set this Patreon up, that's what it's going to be based a lot on, is stories. So if you have a story, send it to us. Our email is appalachianintelligence@gmail.com. That's also in the show notes. Any information that you need will all be in the show notes. But share the show, guys. If you like what you're hearing, share the show. We want to keep this thing growing. It's way bigger than what I ever thought it would be in 4 months' time. I couldn't imagine that it would be as big as it is right now, but that's why. It's because people are sharing it. So continue to do that.
We really appreciate that, guys.
We really do appreciate it. We thank you guys so much, and continue to rate and review. That way, we can read it on here at the start of every episode and keep giving you guys some love. So, guys, again, this was a great one. Love y'all. Love all you listeners, viewers out there. And until next time, we'll see you guys later.
See you
guys.
later.